Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, and it is now a course at NYU and an elective towards the journalism certificate. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, and follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Hi, everybody. It's Estelle Erasmus, and I'm so happy to welcome Anne Hood to the program for the second time. And a little bit about Anne. She is the author of a dozen books of memoir and fiction, including the best-selling novels, The Book That Matters Most, The Red Thread, and The Knitting Circle. She lives in Providence, Rhode Island, and New York, and this is her latest book, which is a wonderful novel called The Stolen Child. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you for having me, Estella.
Oh,
Great to be here again.
You're, as long as you keep writing books, you're welcome to be a guest on my program. I love our conversations, and I loved our last conversation about Flygirl, and now we're going to talk novel. We're switching from memoir to novel. So Here's my first question. This is a departure from what you've recently done, and tell me the genesis of the idea of this book, because it, for me, knowing you a little bit, it melds some of your passions of food and travel and art. And if you can expound on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So, I always say that I feel like my brain is like that filter you have in your dryer that collects all the lint, and you have to keep cleaning it out. So as I'm just moving through my world, stuff is just going in there. Like, I'm not a person who takes notes, carries a journal, writes down my observations. I like to see what my brain has selected versus some arbitrary or forced observation. And so I had several things kind of bouncing around in there, and I had not a clue if I could connect them or if I should. And here's what they were. The first one was more than 10 years ago, maybe 12 or 15 years ago. My whole family went to Paris. I mean, extended family. It was just this giant party in Paris for New Year's. And we went to the Musée d'Orsay, which is my favorite museum. And I was struck by how all the artists were men. And then I saw maybe one female, but I was like, that's so weird, because I love this museum and I love this art, but no women are represented. And no sooner did I have that thought than I walk into one of the rooms, and there's this painting, and it's not very big, and it's of cows in mud on a farm. And it was just so striking and took my breath away. And I went to see who had painted it. And it was a woman, and her name was Rose Bonheur. And she had quite a career, but the men just overshadowed her. And so that was sort of in my mind, like a woman during Impressionism or that era. What did she do? What did she hope for? Why did this woman paint? Because then I researched her, all farm scenes, all rural stuff. So that was sort of in the dryer filter up there. And then years after that, and I even had a postcard that I bought at the museum kind of above my computer of that painting. Several years later, I was just feeling kind of blue and I was kind of teary. And this thought popped in my head. I wonder how many tears I've cried. I wish I had collected them and like labeled them, so I would be able to look back and say, I can't believe I cried so many tears over Peter Hayhurst, junior of high school, or the bigger ones, that you should cry about it, but to remember that time. And then I thought, what would you do with them if you had all those tears? And I just immediately thought I'd start a museum of tears. And as soon as I had that thought, I was like, this is a novel. This is a novel. And I don't know what it is, but I just started writing very slowly over 3 to 4 years. Just these scenes with Enzo collecting the tears.
We spoke about Flygirl. You did mention, because I said, what are you working on? And I'm always so astounded that somebody, well, you're very prolific and accomplished, but you were like, oh yes, I have a book and
Yeah.
and it's just amazing because I don't know if you listened to some of the recent
Yes.
episodes, but I mean, I've had Maggie Smith and I've had Abigail Thomas, and I have said so many times, I've quoted something that you said, that you are a volcano
Yeah,
writer, because
that's
I
right.
identify that way too. I say that all the time.
Yeah.
Did it come out like a volcano when
I
you?
was so in love with the character of Enzo and the idea of a museum of tears. And for some reason, and I had the same like just image when I wrote my novel, The Obituary Writer, which is also kind of historical fiction, not kind of, it is, that I don't know why, but he just lived in this particular era. And I happened to collect nativities from Naples. That is a real street. And those artisans have been there hundreds of years making those nativities. And so I thought I just put him there and it just fit and it was delightful. But the Museum of Tears and that character did not a novel make. There was just not enough tension. I was like, what's the story? And then I thought of my artist, and I knew that she was going to be the catalyst for the story, but not be in it. So I created her. And then it was sort of the volcano. Then it just started spewing out. And I have those 3 storylines.
And you have Nick,
Yep.
how he interacted with the artist in the beginning, and then
Yep.
he becomes a pivotal way of bringing in Jenny, who is
Yeah.
who I really almost related the most to Jenny, maybe because she's a woman
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
she,
Right.
is finding her own self-actualization throughout the novel. I could totally see how Enzo was so compelling, because he's a very compelling, and you want to kind of just maternally
Yeah.
take
Right.
care of him. That's how I felt about Enzo.
Totally.
With Nick, I was kind of conflicted. I was like, well, is he? I knew he was a good guy, but he didn't
Yeah.
always do the best actions or decisions in his life. And then Jenny, I just was like all for Jenny. So did you see early Anne in Jenny in some ways?
100%, Estelle. Yes. So she was born because of math. Once I put Nick in World War One, in order for him to go back and unravel the mystery of his action, then it plunked her in the 70s. And I was like, oh my goodness, the gods are smiling at me, because that's when I went to college. So I could just give her, I had those Mary Mecco sheets. I, walked down that street, that the main street near Brown University. Like I was voted most likely to succeed, but I didn't mess anything up. I continued on the path on which I started, and I thought, but what if I hadn't? And that gave her the sort of mettle and also empathy that she was on really a path of glory, and she messed it up. And so now she needs to fix her life. So it was kind of one of those questions that I think writers often ask, what if?
It's fascinating because I get a lot of novels sent to me for the program, and I'm very particular because I feel that novels need to be written in such a way that they grab you by the throat from the beginning and they take you along, and you can, and particularly when it's historical,
Yeah.
the basis, it has to feel authentic.
Yes.
I could tell that you did the research, that everything was authentic. It wasn't like you were making it up from a
Right.
movie that you once saw.
Right.
So
It's so
can you bring me along on the research elements of everything involved with
Yeah.
this?
And I'll say first, Estelle, that even if I'm writing something that's not historical, I just research. I just want to understand more than I need to know about a topic. When I wrote my novel, The Knitting Circle, which basically women knit, I mean, and have conversations, but it's modern day. And I read everything I could on knitting. I read Pablo Neruda wrote poems about knitting. I read those. I investigated different patterns from different places. And all of that did kind of leak into the book, like it just a little bit, enough to give it a nice point of view, a little gravitas, to show that I was kind of an authority. So I even research what I don't need to research. So I love to do it. I love sitting in a library, like on a rainy day like today, and just going deep. So I happen to always have been fascinated by World War One. That's why I set Nick in World War One. I knew it was a war story that forced him to make this life or death decision. But I could have so easily made it Vietnam, which I lived through. I could have made it World War II, which I grew up with uncles and neighbors who had all been in World War II. But my fascination has always been World War One for reasons I can't explain. And I've passed on that fascination to my son. And so while all this stuff is going in my brain, he sent me a link to an Instagram account by a National Geographic photographer who was taking photographs of World War I trenches in France, and discovered that almost all of them had art carved into the walls, and that the soldiers were down there and they were making art while they waited for the battle, for the Germans to approach. And the pictures are chilling. And equally or more chilling is the fact that the death rate in World War I of those soldiers was so off the charts that it was probably the last act of life they did before most of them probably died. And that just really stuck with me. So I knew Nick was going to be in a trench in France, and that he was going to be an artist. So then I wrote to the photographer to ask him about it. I read up on trenches in general, on trench warfare, and I knew some of it because, as I said, I've always been fascinated. But then I went on Google Maps, which is a trick Paula McLean taught me when she wrote The Paris Wife. She didn't go to Paris. She did it all on Google Maps. She couldn't afford to go to Paris. And I just looked at maps of France and Brussels and where the trenches with the art had been found. And I talked to my son about battles, and I recreated this time and place.
It's fascinating. I mean, I know I said fascinating before, but it is, because you also imbued it with craft, right, throughout. So you're a master craftsperson. I see you as a master craftsperson.
Thank you for that.
And you built through lines into this throughout. And I know, because I know how you approach your writing, that this was intentional. Can you address that?
Yeah. So many books ago, I think it was my third or fourth novel, back in like 1990 or something, I got a Kirk, and my books were selling well, and my first book had sold magnificently. I was getting pretty decent reviews and book contracts. And my Kirkus review for that book was a couple lines of plot summary and then so what? And I was like, oh my goodness. I took to my bed for like a week. But then I kind of pulled myself up by my bootstraps, and I said, why does this reviewer say, so what? And I thought about it, and I was like, and I'm such a big reader, and I was like, well, there's no plot here. And there was no plot in my last book, and I made it my business to study plot. So I spent the next year reading detective books. I was like, those writers know how to do this. They know how to keep pages turning. They know how to leave, we call them Easter eggs now, but like little clues. And I also took 2 screenwriting classes because, plot is so important. And I just started figuring out how the type of writing I do could use some of those same techniques and skills. And the next book I wrote, the reviews were all about the plot, how they couldn't stop turning pages. And so I'm like, I got it. I figured out how to do this well. Now I want to complicate it. To me, the manuscript is kind of like a big jigsaw puzzle. And I know that all the pieces can fit, but how? And a big part of my writing is figuring that out. How am I going to fit this all together? And when do I let the reader know this detail? When do I reveal? And you want kind of big reveals at the end. So how do I hold that back without seeming coy to the reader? And it's really asking myself those questions and doing some hit or miss. Sometimes I don't quite get it right for many drafts.
So did you know all the plot points and the through lines? And when I say through line, maybe we should explain if people don't know. It's threads that go throughout the book, such as maybe somebody's search for home or belonging,
Yes.
or like you're the expert at using the objective correlative, like
Yes,
so
right.
maybe an object or a painting or
Yes,
something represents emotion, and then
right.
is built in throughout. And I'm sure you have other examples that you could share of that. But how did that evolve as you wrote, or did you kind of have it all plotted out from the beginning?
It's actually a combination because I have ideas and I make these charts. And so, I've started a new book, of course, because this one actually was finished, a year. It takes so long to get to this point. And I just have my chart and it has bullet points and timelines and through lines all over the place. And it wouldn't make sense to any, it's sort of like the Rosetta Stone, it's breaking a language or code. And so I think I know all of that. And then when I write, I discard some and I find new ones. But I think the biggest percentage I have sort of figured out.
How about the POVs? Because writing memoir, you write your own POV. But this novel is very advanced because there are multiple POVs throughout.
Yeah.
And how did you navigate through that and decide and balance it out and all that?
That's such a good question. I am a firm believer that readers will accept anything if there's a pattern and they intuit that pattern. And so it's not going to work if we're always in Nick's point of view and then 10 chapters later Jenny drops in and never shows up again. They're going to be like, why did we get her point of view? What was that about? So I just figured out, when I had a sense of how many pages the manuscript was, I put the Museum of Tears chapters every like 50 pages. So Nick and Jenny basically alternate. And then we go to the Museum of Tears, which is on a different timeline. And they catch up at the end, which I've always liked that in books.
Yes, that's right. It catches up at the end. It all comes together, and I'm not going to give it away, but a big revelation. So you have to read to the end because you get captured and captivated by these very real feeling characters who embody human emotion and dreams and hopes and growth and failures.
Right. And there's a mystery. And I was hoping that part of the thing readers would keep reading for is to find out the answer that Nick and Jenny are looking for,
And you said that this took you about 4 years to come together to write.
About 5. Yeah.
But you also had a children's book come out. You had other projects. I mean, Anne.
Well, I'll tell you, I think I would have finished it sooner, but it might have been a different book. Like, actually, I'm always glad when I get derailed. I know that's weird, but it helps things to kind of ferment more than they would have. And books end up taking a different turn that's unexpected and fun to explore. But I was kind of working on this when the pandemic struck. And that was when I came up with the idea for Flygirl. And what I thought was, all my teaching has gone away, all my lectures and traveling, and I have literally nothing to do. If they'll give me a contract for a Flygirl, I can finish this novel and then I'll have another project. And then maybe the pandemic will be over. I was just like trying to fill my days and my hours and also, not have my bank account completely disappear. But my publisher surprised me by saying, put the novel aside. We want to do the nonfiction book first. So I actually didn't work on this. That's why it's 5 years total. But for like a year and a half, I thought about it.
Yeah.
And I'd look at it and maybe make notes, but I was really concentrating on Flygirl.
So what's interesting to me is that food, food in general is sort of like an additional character in
I
this.
love that. That's great.
Talk to me about that. And of course, I feel that it's probably connected to your husband.
He may have something to do with it. Food is a really good objective correlative, and it stands in for almost every emotion. You know, when I teach nonfiction or memoir writing, one assignment I always give them, and without any further instructions, is family dinner. And what comes out is how much they loved their grandmother, how their father was abusive to their mother, how fear in the household, confusion in the household, drinking in the household. Family dinner just brings out. So I just think that portal that food offers a writer is huge, you know, and that we should step through it. Now, of course, it is true that I'm married to a food writer. So, and that, you know, he's a wonderful cook. And we spend a lot of time going out to eat, eating in, talking about what we're going to eat next, you know, all of that. And when we travel, we certainly eat out a lot and explore. And we will pick places to go based on we want to try that kind of food, you know. So it is very big to me, but I'm also Italian American. And our family center was food. Sunday dinner, that was it. You know, like we weren't allowed to go to our friend's house on a Sunday or go play baseball. On Sundays, you were home, the entire extended family, and like a 9-course meal that lasted all day. So it's just kind of in my DNA anyway.
Yeah. I felt like I was, you know, sitting in a restaurant with someone, and it's all imbued into the novel. It's not a separate thing, but it's like, ooh, it makes you feel the sense of place.
Yeah.
And I have been fortunate enough to travel to many of the places that you mention in the novel with my husband. And so it just made me feel that nostalgia for being back there, not in the time and place.
Right.
But yeah, it's wonderful.
What's amazing, Estelle, that online I could actually find menus from many of those restaurants that are long gone. But there are menu websites that are fascinating. People collect them or they're in archives somewhere. So the dinner in that Enzo goes with his brother and his brother's new wife, and you know that dinner with the mussels, with the food, that is real food from that menu at that time, which was so exciting to me.
Wow.
You
And
know?
that's the muscles are a very key element in the story. We will say no more about that. But before we end, I wanted to mention that something else that I took note of, and I'm very aware of each chapter moving the story forward. And I always tell my students each sentence has to move the story forward. And I really did note that each chapter you ended in a very compelling way that brought us forwards. For example, I'm going to read
Okay.
page 39. Okay, so you say, stay put, the young guy was saying. In the distance, the sound of a siren getting closer. For a moment, Nick thought it was the Germans nearing. He was clutching those two blankets, one soft and warm, the other sharp and bulky. Don't make me save them, he mumbled. Outside, doors slammed and footsteps pounded. He heard the older guy say, he's right here. Then he was lifted and rolled onto a stretcher, his arms reaching, grasping for what he left behind. I mean, you could have ended, an amateur might have ended. Then he was lifted and rolled onto a stretcher. End of sentence. But the key, the way that grabs us and wants us to understand and the connective tissue is his arms reaching, grasping for what he left behind.
Right.
And that's intentional.
Yeah. So I have this I don't know if it's a philosophy or rules or whatever. I always give it to my students. I call them the 3 R's. You know, we used to have reading, writing, arithmetic. Writers have react, reply, reflect. When there's an action, like you're right, an instinct might be just get him on the stretcher, but so flat, right? You need to either react, he needs to react to it, reflect on something, or respond to it. And that just gives you the extra layer, the extra power. So you're not ending on a flat sentence. The poet Miller Williams used to say, if you're giving me champagne for the whole poem, don't end on Coca-Cola. And that's ending on Coca-Cola if you don't push to that one more thing, you know?
I have to give one more example of that. So on page 53, Jenny smiled. He even knew romantic movies, this boy. August 25th, she said. She got into her car quickly, not wanting him to see her cry. It was too ridiculous, she thought, as she started the car and pulled away. Hope was a thing with feathers. Wasn't that what Emily Dickinson wrote? And hadn't Jenny's hopes flown away? But still, something deep inside her fluttered. Oh, Anne. Hope is a
thing. You my reading. You read it so beautifully.
Thank you. I feel it. I mean, hope is the thing with feathers. So let's break this down. You are quoting a poem by Emily Dickinson. You are not only doing that, you are tying it into the story of Jenny's actual connection and feelings about this boy, and then connecting it with the further ending sentence, her hope flown away, but still deep inside, something fluttered. I mean, an amateur could have ended with maybe just what Emily Dickinson wrote and just there. But you put in, as you said, the, react, reply, reflect, the reflection part.
Right.
And the connective part is, but still something deep inside her fluttered, which makes me want to turn the page. Well, what fluttered? Well, what is it? And you did this in every chapter because I marked it.
I see all your post-its. You're funny. And it's interesting that you brought up that sentence. That was like 2 days work to come up with the word fluttered.
Intentional.
I wanted to evoke a certain, feathers and the idea of flying. And I tried, something inside her moved. So boring, not right. Moved is so generic. And then I kept trying them. And honestly, it was like 2 days before I came up with the word fluttered.
It's like a master class in figuring out how to put those connective elements together. And you do it just so beautifully. And I have a lot more of those examples, but I want to end with, how is this different than writing memoir, which you are so well known for, although you've written other novels? And what has your favorite part of the publishing process been?
Wow. Okay. So I like writing novels more. That's my thing. When I was a little girl, and I read Little Women, and I said, I want to do this. I want to tell stories like this. I didn't want to talk about me. I wanted to make up a family like the March family. I wanted to bring in danger and trouble and love and broken hearts and like all that big stuff. And yes, memoir does have that, but you have to have experienced it, right? So memoir, you have the story, and the work of it is figuring out which parts are important to use and in which order are you going to use them. And then you still have to do your 3 R's. It's reflecting and reacting to those events, not just reporting them. So it's a whole different set of tools that you're using. Whereas when I'm writing a novel, like I have this box with 250 pages of a new novel, terrible, just at the beginning stages. And all I want to do is work on that. I'm talking, I'm having a cocktail with someone, and I'm like, every morning I wake up and say, I just want to do my book now. I love being in the world of my imagination.
I wish I could say the same. It takes me, I'm a volcano writer, but it takes me to get that point, and then it comes out. But I have a teenager. I'm not making, maybe I am making excuses.
We all do that. That's part of the process.
And so the publishing process now is the promo part for you.
Yes. So I love going to bookstores and meeting people who have read the book and talking like you and I have been talking and having them ask me questions. I like this part. I have 6 weeks where some days I have 2 different events and it's going to be crazy and I'm going to get tired. But when I walk in a room and people are holding the book, or people are telling me, as you did, what affected them, or it's just like, wow, I spent 5 years on this and it's actually out in the world. And I'm happy to talk to people about how I wrote it, what I was thinking. The part I don't love so much is waiting for reviews. They come or they don't come. They're good or they're not good. me obsessively checking my Amazon rating. Like, I don't like all that nervousness around it. And I wish I could just say whatever it is, I wrote it and I'm meeting people who are reading it, but you can't be that way. It's your career. So I have to kind of pay attention to a lot of the details that I wish I didn't have to.
I understand.
Yeah.
And so the next novel is what's next, or is there an interim other project, another
No,
children's book perhaps?
No, I am in discussion about another children's book, but right now this is the premier project.
Thank you so much, Anne, for being a guest again. You are welcome to come back anytime for anything you work on, because I know it's going to be excellent and well worth it for my audience.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I love talking to you, Estelle.
Follow me at estelleserasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.